So we're talking today with Cheryl Johnson. Cheryl is Executive Director of People from Community Recovery. It's an environmental justice group here in Altgeld Gardens. So thanks, Cheryl. So tell us about Altgeld Gardens. What are we looking at as we drive around over here?
Well, Altgeld Gardens. Altgeld Gardens was built during the World War II for the returned veterans, and it is located on 180 acres of land. It nearly has 2,000 units on it, and it used to be the home for returning veterans. We moved in Altgeld Gardens in 1962 because my uncle was in the Army, and this allowed us to be able to move out here.
And when you say returning veterans, you're talking about African American veterans, right?
African American veterans, yes, for World War II, because there wasn't any housing for many veterans that came back to Chicago from World War II. It used to have 1,980 units. They demolished 684, so we got nearly 1,500 units in Altgeld Gardens. What else you want to say?
Well, can you talk about your mother and talk about the idea of environmental contamination that she was known as trying to correct or trying to stop?
Well, my mother is known as the mother of environmental justice. She started working on environmental issues in the early 80s because she heard a telecast that said that the south side of Chicago has a high incidence of cancer than any other area in the city of Chicago based on zip code. And our zip code at that particular time was 60628. And it was, 60627. And she wanted to know why. I considered that my father, who contracted lung cancer March of 1969 and passed away June of that same year. And when she got to start talking to her neighbors, because she heard this report, people got to telling her about their experience with family members or themselves being in remission, or a family member had passed from cancer, and she just wanted to know why. So on her own personal research, she was able to learn that we have 50 documented landfills in this area and over 350 hazardous waste sites. So she started campaigning to saying that, this wasn't right, that this information was not available to the people who are mostly impacted by it. So, and when she started started talking to representatives of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, she discovered that they had no jurisdiction on the impact of industry because they was only mandated to work with academic institutions and to regulate industry. And there was nothing they didn't have no jurisdiction on community having the right to know about environmental issues in their community or the facility. So she started working on, and she coined it at that particular time, environmental racism, because community didn't have the availability to get resources from the main agency that's supposed to protect our environment. And fortunately, she started going around telling her story, her life stories about the experience that people have in the community. And she met people from all over the country, and they worked together to get many of the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Environmental Protection Act, under the Clinton administration. And that's when she was coined at one of these summits that they had in Washington, D.C. in 1991 as the mother of environmental justice.
And can you talk about what you're trying to do now in terms of bringing solar power into this community?
Well, one of the things that my mother, she was able to do is bring the awareness of the urban environment pollution. And just to say that people should have a right to know, and to start the conversations around urban environmental pollution issues. Our goal is to take it a little bit farther than awareness. We want to create solutions to some of the environmental problems in our area, and to look at it from a different perspective as alternative. What is the alternative from using fossil fuels to produce electricity, for an example? We know that solar energy is one of the growing industry that's in the United States. So we're hoping to make our community a solar array system to produce energy to power up our houses in the community, to reduce our carbon footprint in the whole environmental arena. So that is one that we want to look at the Little Calumet River, which is highly contaminated, and how can we use that water to produce energy for heating. We're looking at that. We have a lot of open space in this area. How can we support wind turbine in this area to produce energy, so that we can have a mass production of energy for heating and electrical, to make our community a more green, sustainable community. We look at and we understand that the fact that a lot of remediation had to happen in an area in order to support new renewable projects. So we have trained residents in the area of environmental remediation, hazmat remediation, mold remediation, underground storage tank. So we tried to give them a wealth of training to be able to create the workforce that is needed. We need an environmental remediation workforce, and that could come in different types of disciplines. So we want our community. The ultimate goal is to create a green, sustainable community.
And what's it like for your mother to spend a lifetime at this work, and now you're spending a lifetime at this work? What's it like to stay engaged in one of these problems or several of these problems for years and years at a time? I mean, it's hard work, right? It's hard to keep yourself motivated, or not. I mean, what's it like to try to take this on day after day and year after year and over again?
It's challenges because the resources is not being delivered directly to the communities that are impacted. The challenge is that people don't see the interconnection of environmental injustice in our community to reach justice for our community. You know, housing is a major issue in this area. The quality of housing is an issue in this area. Education is substandard in this area. The health facilities is substandard in this area. And then their lack of investment is a huge disparity for this community. So when you're looking at to try to raise the consciousness about raise environmentally consciousness of the people in your community, but you got all these disparities that's happening in your community, it's hard for them to make that connection. Sometimes people don't connect the pollution in the air to the asthma attack that they had someone in their family or themselves has experienced. So making those type of connections, and the affordability is a challenge to live in the city of Chicago. So and people tend to live in the south side and the west side of Chicago, where the housing stock is poor, but there's a lot of manufacturing and industrial developments or in those communities that causes some of the environmental problems that environmental health related illnesses that people may have. But it's just because we're not good at creating green sustainable developments for areas to reduce the amount of pollution in the south and west side of Chicago.
All right. Well, it's a lifetime of work, but we'll check in again in the future from now and then, time to time, and see how you're doing. But thanks again for taking the time to explain this today.
I hope I did a good job.
I hope so. You did.